Are you seeing like a little bit of dabbling as far as institutions right now? Or do you think this is probably going to be another year to like 18 months before they fully submerge themselves into this industry when we have some clear structure in place? Hey, everyone. Welcome to our latest TDR Cannabis Exclusive. Thanks for checking in today. This is take two. We had a little bit of technical issues yesterday in our live stream with Dan Ahrens from AdvisorShares, but like this man needs no introduction at all. Let's just jump into it. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Let's not play that game again. No.
How are you? Good to see you. But
I'm doing well.
yeah, if I didn't get a chance to hear you yesterday, but how was the holiday season? And pretty exciting times, would you say, for the industry as we've now embarked finally on 2024?
Yeah, I like to think so. Last week was a nice bump and some
Wasn't
positive
it?
things coming out. But, this week, not so much, but I don't mind. I
Yeah,
like
fine.
reminders to investors that this is normal course. Things go up and down. These
Yeah,
are extremely volatile cannabis stocks, and they don't just move in one direction. All is
yeah,
well. All is
yeah.
well.
We saw, like you said last week, an uptick in volume. One day had 10 million in volume. Your average is around 6. We saw 23 million in one day back in September.
Yep.
Do you think we've turned the corner as far as investor sentiment? Yes, still volatile, but do you think now that we're into a new year, we've turned the corner? Or am I
That
getting a
is
little ahead of myself?
there's all sorts of stuff in that question, Chad. Yes, ish. Because I liked last week a nice upward movement.
Yep.
The volume wasn't outrageous, and I was talking to some other folks in the industry, and I said it was orderly, is what it was last week. It was
Okay.
orderly. Everything moved smoothly. So, no, I want to reinforce there's still going to be plenty of ups and downs, even when we get our DEA announcement, which can I use the word betting on? I think it's coming.
Yeah.
I hate predictions about the timing of because
Yeah.
I gently said that I think it might be coming before the end of November, if not December. I tempered my words, no guarantees, but I think that DEA announcement's still coming. I don't know when, and things could get violently moving upwards. But we all know it's not going to be a done deal, even when we
Yeah.
get that DEA. There's going to be
Yeah.
multiple steps to put things in place, the Attorney General letter. And you know what? This stuff's going to move violently up and down once again,
Yeah.
as long as we get a over the course of the year, a nice upward trajectory that
Yeah.
I like to think we're going to get.
Yeah. I think history will repeat itself based on what you just said. Like when we got a recommendation announcement back on August 29th, we saw a lot of the tier 2 and tier 3 companies outperform the tier 1s, the ones
Yep.
that were basically shorted the most. They have retracted. And I could definitely see those tier 2 and tier 3 companies probably outperforming the big guys in the short term once we do get announcements. But like you said, once I guess the euphoria of the announcement is gone, there's a lot of work that's got to get done, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Once again, the DEA acceptance of that doesn't put all the framework in place.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this with other people. A real big thing is you get the DEA accepting, let's say it's a Schedule 3 recommendation that we all think is coming. What does that mean for medical cannabis states? I mean, Schedule 3
Yeah.
means it's a prescription drug. So we need guidance. Everybody thinks there's going to be we keep calling it the Garland memo, an attorney general letter that's going to
Yeah.
describe that the current medical framework that individual states have and dispensaries is good. In this case, for Schedule 3, that's different than a physician writing a prescription. The other thing that this Attorney General letter needs to do is address the entire elephant in the room of adult use. Schedule
Uh-huh.
3 drugs aren't usually used for adult use without some kind of prescription.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry here that's operating in now a majority of the states. employing tens of thousands, if not hundred thousands of Americans. So no, they're not going to throw that out. The Attorney General letter, from everything we've heard from top to bottom, is going to address that. But still, there's a hell of a lot of framework that needs to be put in place for all this stuff. And then put on top of that, capital markets, exchange listing, all the other stuff
Yeah.
that needs to
Yeah.
come.
Yeah.
And all that
I think,
stuff means ups and downs for these stocks. Okay.
yeah,
I'm
100%.
sorry to
I
cut
think
you
what you just
off.
outlined too is probably the main reason why institutions are saying, look, we'll miss the first 20% upswing once you guys
Yeah.
get your stuff all figured out. And there's a lot of that. But are you seeing like a little bit of dabbling as far as institutions right now? Or do you think this is probably going to be another year to like 18 months before they fully submerge themselves into this industry when we have some clear structure in place?
Dabbling is a good word for it. And a big thing is who physically can invest in these stocks.
Good point. Good
That's a
point.
big one. So there are plenty of institutions wanting to.
Yeah.
There's things like family offices, hedge funds, things like that can sometimes with a little bit of difficulty, depending on who their custody banks are and prime brokers are and who they use. And we know a lot of those family offices invest in our fund MSOS because we communicate with them. But there's
Yep.
plenty of other family offices, hedge funds, those types of structures that can. You move to a different level of institutional investor, and many of them just flat out cannot.
Hmm.
I mean, we're talking about OTC traded stocks here, many times listed on the secondary exchanges. What TerraSend did, and now what Curaleaf has done,
Yeah.
opened additional doors. And when I say what
Yep.
they've done, they listed on the Toronto. That allows additional investment from institutions. But hey, now we're still talking about a Canadian exchange, still traded OTC technically in the US. And then even the fund itself, depending on what brokerage firms and wirehouses that we're talking about, the fund itself is still blocked at some places. The fund itself is available to a lot more investors than some of the individual OTC names, but the fund's not even available everywhere else. So that's a whole
Yeah.
series of steps. And do I have a prediction on how long it's really going to take? Hell no. It's
No one knows.
complicated stuff.
It's very complicated stuff. And I know a lot of investors right now just think it's turnkey, but there's a lot of
Yeah.
things behind the scenes. I was speaking to Boris last month when they listed at the TSX in Toronto. But do you see a lot of that trend going into this year where you're seeing more and more companies that were, say, for example, on the CSE shifting to the TSX? Because after speaking with a lot of representatives there, it's like they're open for service and they're fully immersing this, to say the least.
Yes, but my answer is most companies simply can't do it. They don't have the corporate structure
Right.
that Jason at TerraSend has, and Boris and Camilo at Cureleaf, they had to do some restructuring and they had to do some work. It was some heavy
Yeah.
lifting to get their entities in a structure that worked with the TSX. Now, if you
Hmm.
look at hell, our largest holding is Green Thumb, but Green Thumb is a single entity in the United States, a very well run one. We're big fans, obviously, but now yet you have to talk to Boris or Jason and talk to the Toronto themselves. It's a complicated structure. The
For sure.
simplest way is, Jason told me we had to put a fence around our U.S. operations, and you have to have, non-U.S. operations and U.S. operations. You got to have a fence around the U.S. operations. Complicated stuff. It simply isn't even an option to think about under current rules, current laws for most of the MSOs to do. Not
Yeah.
yet.
I was actually surprised, but not surprised. And I spoke to both Jason and Boris that these conversations did not happen a year ago. This was 5 years in the making. So, needless to say, if you haven't started these conversations, there's probably really no point in entertaining them for, like you said, companies that don't have the proper structure in place to list, let's say, on a senior exchange like the TSX and wait for some more developments within the US. But um, all in all, like, what would you say outside of this pending rescheduling announcement? What are key trends that you're watching closely from a fundamental standpoint going into 2024 when factoring in a lot of the companies that are part of your ETFs?
Yeah, there's lots of things. It's it's limited licenses. Every state structure is different. When you look at some of the markets that aren't really integrated and limited license, like California. What's the most important thing in California? It's taxes and prices. So
Right.
watching those things, everybody thinks California's going to get better. And God, we've been just like waiting on federal reform. We've been waiting on California
Yeah.
to get better for years now. Backing up to Curaleaf, I was really complimentary of Boris last year. He said we're going to exit some of the non-profitable markets and focus on the better markets. And then,
Yeah.
within 3 months later, he was, announcing that he's leaving Oregon and basically everything on the West Coast. And people were like, "Oh my God, they're exiting these markets." Now he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do.
Yeah. For good reason. Right.
Something else is state by state, things keep growing. And we have ballot
Look at Maryland.
initiatives for additional medical cannabis states that are probably going to come online in 2024. We have medical market states that might go adult use. And the big ones, the real big ones to watch are Florida and Pennsylvania. I mean,
Yeah.
those could be great, great markets because the medical markets there, especially Florida, are so darn strong and well run at adult use. And, that's a cherry on top. Those things are strong.
And 140 million tourists per year. But I think Florida has the potential to become what California could have been.
Yeah,
And that to me, Kim said a $6 billion market, and I think she's right. I think that market is going to be the biggest cannabis market in the world.
I can't disagree. No, it's fantastic, and I think again one of the things we've been waiting on year after year, and there's a Republican governor there, and some fighting back and forth, but now it looks like it'll finally get there, and it won't be blocked. So
Yeah,
all of those things are still moving in the right directions. Before we came on air, we were talking about the difference between some of these Canadian companies that are spendthrifts, if we don't mind calling them that, as compared to these U.S. companies that
yeah,
are more often properly, frugally run.
yeah,
Now, they were forced to be frugally run because they don't have all that capital markets money because of the
yep,
whole U.S. structure. But
yep,
needless to say, it is what it is. So most of these companies are financially sound, even though they're begging for for federal reform and they need capital. But no, we can't hide the fact that we really, really got to have the federal reform. I mean,
yeah,
fundamentals are okay ish, but we got to have federal reform. And I think we're really finally going to get it this year. Although I will freely admit, I'm the boy that cried wolf. I was expecting it last year. I was expecting it the year
yeah.
before. I wrote a damn book about it 3 years ago. We're still waiting on it. But now, thankfully, we're not, depending on elected politicians. Um,
That's
we're
a
going to
breath of
get it.
fresh air,
We're going
isn't
to
it?
get it by federal bureaucrats that are appointed by by politicians.
I
I
know.
think we're really going to get it this time with the rescheduling. And hell, the rescheduling
Yeah,
is
I do too.
so much more impactful than just something like safe
Then
banking.
safe. Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. I keep hearing Q1, not end of probably Q2. I'll put my neck out in the line. I keep sticking to that. I think it's Q2. Q3 it becomes too late as we head closer into the election, but that's some of the
Yeah.
feedback that I've received. But we actually had a lawyer on last week who's big into the cannabis law. He actually thinks it'll happen after the election. I completely respectfully disagree with him when it comes to that. But I think Q2 is probably the sticking point. It would be amazing if they made this announcement on 420, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But if that were to happen, needless to say, it's we've turned a corner.
Well, a real big question here, though, is what is it? So when I hear attorneys say, "Oh, I think it might, actually be after the election," they might be talking about full enactment of new laws.
Good point. Good point.
Um, and I've been hearing from people that's why I said I think maybe probably I'm hopeful for I expected it before the year end. I was expecting an announcement, and now I'm still expecting an announcement sooner rather than later. Whereas Boris, who is very much in the same loop and talks to a lot of the
Yeah.
same people, he's been vocal about saying he thinks April.
Yeah.
So,
Me.
but the big question here is what is it? Because I think I'm looking forward to the DEA saying, yes, we are going to accept and recommend a Schedule 3. Does
Hmm.
that make it a done deal? Well, no. They still have to. Then it goes back to the Department of Justice. It's not a choice. It's a done deal, but they haven't put all the pen to paper and said this is a new law. There's gonna
Yeah.
be stops and starts of actual enactment of all this stuff, and we still need the Attorney General letter that I mentioned earlier. So
Yeah. Well, I'll be curious to see what kind of volume that we'll get. Like I said, 23 million one day it hit in September back when there was the recommendation announcement. But if there's actual full on confirmation, and then once that all gets put into play, but if the DEA were to say that, yes, we are going to reschedule this, I think 23 million is definitely a number that will be achieved, if not more. But I don't
yeah,
want to put you on the spot and think of what kind of volume that you'll get. But I think it'll be obviously a very attractive time for the industry. Speaking of your ETF, are there any companies not included currently in it that you're considering?
I'm not going to name names, but no, I always have
Don't expect you to.
I always have a running list. No, we're always looking at the entirety of the industry. There's a
Yeah,
couple companies that we have chosen not to add, and I got no regrets. And every once in a while on the social media, whatever, people say, "But you own XYZ company."
yeah, I
Well,
know.
I bought XYZ company 3 years ago under different circumstances when we were, looking for, capacity wherever we could invest in stocks. And do I really like that stock now? No,
Not so
maybe
much.
not. But it ain't worth my time and effort and selling, and it's not material to the fund. And there's some real gems in the bottom part of the portfolio as well that at today's prices, goodness growth, the New York exposure.
Yep.
Um, New York has been a shit show. It's been horrible for the last couple of years after we thought it was going to be huge, but New York is full upside from today. They're starting to get their
Boris was
act
telling
together in
me,
New
think of
York
that.
a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely think based on some of the announcement last month. But again, I was speaking to Boris. What a wholesale market that's going to be, because from what I'm hearing, the black market dispensaries could flip to legal dispensaries. And I don't know if the last time you were in the Big Apple, I was there last month, and these black market dispensaries, you'd never think that they're illegal. The storefronts are incredible, and they're at every single block. So if they're coming down hard on these landlords and finding them as much as $10,000 a day, you can understand that that's going to change in a hurry. Give them incentives to obviously flip to the legal side. And then if you're a multi-state operator, the last thing you'd want to do is start to build a retail footprint within that, area. But the wholesale market, tremendous upside to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah, going back to the fund, we've always thought that with federal reform, things are going to change, and
Yep.
we're going to get stocks that we own via total return swap right now. We're hopefully going to be able to own them directly in custody. We're also going to have the companies themselves growing a great deal. We're going to have additional companies going public. There hasn't been much of that in the U.S. side of the business for a while
Hmm.
now,
Hmm.
for obvious reasons. But no, we might have some additional companies going public, and they could. So some tiny companies that I view as uninvestable right now might become investable. Companies that aren't even public right
Gotcha.
now might become investable. So we're always looking at the universe of stocks. Something else about the fund is, hell, last December a year ago, we were expecting safe maybe. I do a lot of work on what's called the plumbing of the fund. And that means dealing with these swap counterparties, getting additional swap counterparties, getting backup swap counterparties, negotiating what the best rates are going to be, making sure there's plenty of capacity for when we do get those huge volume days that you're talking about, Shad.
Yeah.
I want to make sure the plumbing is in place that the fund can accept huge amounts of inflows. At the same
Yeah.
time, we've made sure that the fund can accept huge amounts of outflows should those ever happen, and they really haven't.
Yeah.
Even through the ups and downs, it's and sometimes people say, "Oh, the fund had an outflow." It's a normal course of business. Money goes in, money goes
Yeah.
out. It's mostly been in, but I spent a lot of time making sure all that structure is in place and running smoothly, because we're expecting good things.
Yeah, and I think I can't imagine the amount of back end work that's involved in structuring that. So, putting you on the spot, I can't even imagine. But
It's not tricky.
timeline wise,
No,
when
but
you
go ahead.
bring up a lot of this stuff, okay, we get the announcement, then we got to put pen to paper and put a lot of this work into place. Do you think it's still another 12 to 18 months before these institutions that quote unquote are allowed are fully submerged into this industry? Do you think it's still? Yeah, I still think it's a ways away,
Yeah.
but does 12 to 18 months seem realistic?
Sure. I don't feel strongly about the dates because I know it's a lot of things to take place and a lot of work to be done. Now, does
Yeah.
not, in the meantime, I think these stocks have the potential, choosing my words here, potential to go through the roof. I mean, to be really,
Yeah.
really, get a big bump when we get the DEA announcement and other multiple announcements along the way, such as the Attorney General letter. And I think when we get the rescheduling announcement and the Attorney General letter, I think it makes it a whole lot easier for our darn politicians, the elected ones, to go ahead and do safe banking or safer banking
Yeah,
and
that's a good
some of
point.
the other bills. It takes the heat off and makes those things easier to pass. So those are all big steps for these actual stocks, even while we might be waiting for all the paperwork behind the scenes.
Hmm.
So I don't know if a DEA announcement means that, B of A Merrill is suddenly going to allow cannabis stocks. I don't know
Yeah,
if
of course.
a DEA announcement is going to suddenly make the NASDAQ or NYSE uplist these stocks. Those are all additional steps that got to follow.
Yeah, that first step, though, is a big step because like nobody wants to sign off on this, but man, the DEA could actually help a lot of people within this industry and like really nonchalantly and indirectly push a lot of these politicians, I guess, in the right direction, knowing that they've got to make something happen.
Yep.
We've had a couple of questions from some of our viewers about some of the companies and positions. I know that yesterday during some of the stuff that we're trying to talk, Canopy Growth is not part of MSOs, but is very much part of your global cannabis ETF YOLO. So I'd like to find out, like, when it comes to determining factors, when it comes to structuring certain ETFs where one company is included in one ETF and not another, like, how is that decided?
Well, it's by the fund's prospectus is a big one. So always remember that any fund anywhere has to honor what is in its principal investment strategy and in its prospectus, and then part of its personal choice. When we first launched MSOS, it had quite a bit more ancillary. Some of the REITs, some of the grow gens, things like this, and one thing that we put in that fund's description is we want it to be pure US exposure. So that meant
Gotcha.
US companies or companies that are probably making at least 50% of their revenue, 50% of their business in the US. So I still view Canopy as primarily a Canadian company at this point, and I wouldn't want to have it in MSOS. We want to keep MSOS pure. We also, learned along the way that what's your average investor want? Your average investor
Yeah.
wanted the plant touching MSOs. Um, the fund's not required to do that; it's just the ticker. But
Yeah.
I don't think, and so we winded down most of the ancillary exposure in MSO. We want it to be much more pure. in plant touching MSOs primarily. It's not 100%, but really
Yeah.
heavily primarily. So the
But to your
global,
point, like you said earlier, you're always looking at stuff because if the industry changes, then, obviously the worst kept secret in the industry is about Canopy. And if there's Canopy USA eventually down the road, that's very much obviously in play. Tilray as well with their, American footprint that they're trying to get in
yep,
once we see. But that stuff all comes into play, but it's just going to take time. But well explained as to what your current position is right now. And again, what you're probably considering later on down the road, right?
absolutely. And the fund YOLO, people should look at it. I think it doesn't get enough love.
Yeah,
It existed before MSOS, and MSOS couldn't have existed if we hadn't done all the approvals and legal opinions and SEC approvals, NYSE approvals, and everything else. So YOLO's there, but it has more some really good ancillary stuff, some really good medical stuff. It has some Israel, it has some
yeah,
UK. People should take a look. There's some hidden gems in YOLO, in my opinion.
yeah.
One last
Interesting to
thing,
see.
its
Yeah.
biggest holding is MSOS, and we waive the fees. We waive the fees on
Ah,
that, so we're not double dipping. It's an easy way to have U.S. exposure without having all the individual swaps of individual names. So
oh,
got to
that's
say,
important to know. Well, curious to see what's going to happen in Germany. I keep hearing that adult use, the vote's going to happen and pass within the next
yep,
30 to 60 days. So that's, big market to say the least. And curious to see how that'll unfold the European market, knowing that Germany, who always leads first in Europe, if they actually put pen to paper, sign off on that. But it's been a little bit delayed. But yeah, big opportunity for companies like Tilray and Cureleaf. One last question we had one of our viewers. Go ahead. Did you want to finish that thought?
no, go ahead.
Um,
We like
w-
Curaleaf a lot for their European exposure, but go ahead.
one other question from one of our viewers: if you could provide any insight on current short positions on MSOs and what you're currently seeing, do you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, and it's complicated because I think part of the short position, and this is just I think, is because you got to remember there's a lot of market makers making a market in
Yeah,
MSOS. There's a lot of market makers that make a market in MSOX, the 2X version, and MSOX owns lots of shares through swap counterparties of MSOS. There's also options on MSOX and MSOS. So if you look at the top holders of MSOS, you will see some big family offices and hedge funds, but you'll also see the biggest trading firms: Susquehanna, Virtu, Jane Street, Belvedere, others.
okay.
And they're not, take off your tinfoil hats, everybody. All they're doing is making markets. That's their job. Um, I know there was some algos out of Canada, and there was a hedge fund that was shut down that had big short positions. So I'm saying
Yes.
those are the long positions, but there are also a lot of the short positions.
Yeah.
So there's long positions, there's short positions, and a lot of it, not all of it, a lot of it is simply market makers doing their job. When a market maker is selling shares of the fund to the street, they're technically going short the fund. And then they do a creation unit. So
Mm-hmm.
go back and read how ETFs work. But yeah, there's a lot of the long position and short positions are simply held by market makers. Are there other people out there shorting it? Maybe long the individual name, short the fund. That was this one fund strategy I heard about. Probably, maybe. Do I think the short interest is a big deal? Not really. Could it help with when we get the big move up? Could there be some short
Yeah.
squeezing going on?
Sure.
Maybe, probably. Don't ever bet on a short squeeze, but it's nice when it happens. It's like a unicorn, though.
It's real nice when it happens, isn't it? Miss the Tilray GameStop days.
Yeah.
Yeah. One last thing I want to touch on, actually switch to psychedelics real quick. Big news, obviously, last week pertaining to MAPS. They're rebranding to Lycos Therapeutics, $100 million Series A financing round, oversubscribed. Big hitters involved in this space. And that's, I think, going to have a domino effect on your ETF, PISL. Um, we saw, I guess, last week, Numinous Wellness, Cybin, MindMed, Atai, Compass, these stocks have been beaten down so hard.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to see if MAPS now Lycos, and it appears it's heading that way, they do get FDA approval for the MDMA protocol. Um, do you see a lot of these companies that have some sort of association with this company that are already listed on big board exchanges, and knowing they've been hit so hard, they could rebound, say quicker? I don't want to compare it to cannabis, but are you hearing anything that shows some interest levels pertaining to what we're segue into 2024 and that announcement from last week?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's big, but we've been seeing similar announcements, all through the past year. So psychedelics have been, it's frustrating as hell. They have been beaten down. And quick advertisement to everybody listening: show that fund some love. It needs it. It's still a tiny fund. We knew it would be very volatile. These things are very volatile.
Yeah,
Much like cannabis, we wanted the psychedelics fund to be rather pure. We want to have real psychedelics companies in there. That's why we don't hold Johnson and Johnson. Are they dabbling in psychedelics? Sure, they are. Is it a
yeah,
primary part of their business? God, no way.
no,
It's infantile, tiny. So, look at our holdings. You dropped the name just now of a number of our holdings in that fund.
yeah,
They can move wildly, but yeah, we see lots of good step by step here. We think these stocks have the ability to move up a lot, just like they had the ability to move down a lot. There could also be some, it's a tough thing if they're all acquisition targets,
hmm,
because these companies are very different than cannabis, that they trade on their FDA pipeline. They trade based on their intellectual property and what they got versus the other guy. But it's all moving in the right direction. It's all moving more mainstream. And the maps last week was a big step.
yeah, big step to say the least. Well, I hope that we covered off, I think, a lot of questions. I know that you were on Yahoo Finance earlier this week. How'd that interview go? Do the mainstream media, do they understand the space? Are you still trying to walk them through and hold their hand?
Somewhere in between. Somewhere in
Somewhere in
between.
between?
They still love talking about Canopy and Tilray and maybe even a little bit of Aurora here and there, but lesser so. But it's
Right.
got cannabis happening in the U.S. The potential reform that, gosh, we're
Yeah.
waiting on. It's getting more mainstream play in the press. So
Yeah.
but I'm still educating. Whenever I talk to
Well,
them, I'm educating, because a lot of people have just seen red, and all the red that we've seen the last 3 years is the exact same thing that causes a big bunch of investors to still be on the sideline. They're on the sideline, and then they can come in. And that'll be nice when it happens, because there's a lot of true believers that are already pretty deeply invested in cannabis. We need all those people on the sidelines still to come
yeah.
in, and your average investor still on the sidelines.
I had a call with the people over at BDSA Analytics last week, and you brought up just the idea of mainstream. But, like, for example, state of Michigan, and if anyone's consumed cannabis even once within the state of Michigan, as little as 3.5 years ago, was less than 30%. Today, it's over 55%. Like, that's huge growth. Now, is alcohol a lot bigger? Yes, but younger generations, there's just not a lot of people drinking anymore. So you can imagine how much this has grown in the last 2, 3, 4 years.
Yep.
Once we get this proper infrastructure in place, institutions come in. This is the anticipation that anybody that's been following this industry is so excited about. If you show the 52-week charts to people that don't follow it, they're like, hey, I'm out of here. I'm not touching this. But their loss is our benefit, but it just takes time. But, most importantly, I think it's great to have these conversations, just to update people from time to time. But I appreciate you checking in here today and giving us the time. And more importantly, Happy New Year to you, Mackenzie, Noah, and the whole team. And as usual, let's please keep in touch.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Go, go Cowboys too, buddy.
Hey, I like that. Thanks.
Good stuff. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too.
Hey everyone, so what'd you think of the video? Leave your comments below and let us know your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. As usual, subscribe to our channel by clicking on the link here. If you want to see more videos like this, then click on the link here and click on that bell for all notifications. Because most importantly, we want to know your feedback because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.